let me switch over. So this is all the way on the other side of the connectivity picture, so the client agent. And the problems that we saw, and the reason we developed this is, customers pointed out that, especially in verticals where there's a lot of IoT, manufacturing, healthcare, things like that, those devices are really, really quirky, right? But even in the BYOD world, those devices are also quirky. iOS devices, Android. How many flavors of Android are there? And even laptops and things like that. And so, one of the big problems here was that, well, in wireless, the client gets to choose. Right? The client makes all the decisions at the end of the day, and the infrastructure can try and sort of balance it, but it doesn't always work. So is there, we have the infrastructure perspective that's coming from the wireless controller. How about tying in the client perspective as well, right? And seeing whether there are discrepancies, seeing what's going on from the client point of view. So that's one thing. The second thing is, so our initial approach was just saying, we just wanted to be passive all the way around. And that still turns out to be sort of a good approach, because initial deployments and stuff like that, getting clients and things like that are sort of a little bit longer pull. That's why we offer it as more of an option if you really want that data. But the problem is when you only look at it from the infrastructure perspective, it's again, that sort of the dog that didn't bark kind of problem, that if the client can't even connect on wireless, then we're never going to see it from the infrastructure side. There's going to be no packet to look at, no radius transaction, no DHCP transaction or whatever to look at. So again, that's another side from the client. On the roaming side, that turns out to be sort of a very important problem here, or a very difficult problem to catch. Remote users is another issue. Again, so if we take the tack of we're going to monitor from the enterprise infrastructure side, well, what about people that are working from home and sort of VPNing in or whatever it is? When they have problems, is it because they're out in the rural areas or whatever and the internet's not good, or is it because of something else that's going on? So getting a perspective of remote users versus enterprise users and so on. And then finally, again, going back to the scalability question, right? Everything traditional being scale up and sort of going to more of a scale out world. And so the solution we came up with here on this side is introducing a software client agent. So I'll talk about it in more detail in a sec. But this is a piece of software that sits on a device that you can kind of automate if the devices are managed, or it's something you can download if it's a one-off thing. And it's basically running passively on the device, running tests, running synthetic tests to see from the client what it can get to and how it can get there. It's also collecting wireless data from there, from the client side perspective. So it's collecting the driver information, the signal that it thinks it's receiving, the transmit rate that it thinks it's doing, and so on, all from that side. And with the idea that what we want to do at the end of the day is this is a 360 around a client in some sense. The infrastructure perspective, the client perspective, and then the truth somewhere in the middle. So, and then finally, all the Voyance architecture is such that just like with WAN, it's all horizontal, everything, the scalability is kind of inbuilt into the platform.
How are the clients onboarded?
Yeah. So if it's managed, one of our customers uses Chef to manage all their enterprise devices. And so they can just script it, and they script it and just auto deploy all of the clients. But a university, if a student calls or something like that, it's probably not going to do that because they're not managed. That they'll just say, hey, student, download this client agent and put it on your device.
From the App Store?
Yeah, exactly. For Android, it's from the App Store. For Mac and Windows, it's it's not. Yeah. Sorry.
That was my question.
Oh, yeah, right, okay.
Closed platforms and agent software and things like iOS don't allow.
Oh, that's why there's no iOS support. I'll talk about that in a sec.
Okay, cool.
For the agents, you have the synthetic tests there.
Yep.
And then data specific to the Wi-Fi or potentially the cellular data on Android. Are you tapping into RUM data as well?
So you mean, when you say RUM, you mean like an eternity, like a...
Real user monitoring.
Got it. Yeah. So we typically solve different use cases from a RUM, right? A RUM, what we've seen at least with whether it's Eternity or what are some of the other maybe Thousand Eyes plays in that a little bit as well, right? Where they have a client agent, it's more like they're monitoring the data center for a specific application, and they're on the client side looking at like very, very specific load times. They're logging into the app and running those kind of tests and stuff like that. For us, it's not. What we're trying to do is more so just the end-to-end view around user experience in general, not tied to a specific application, but any application that you're using. So the use case is slightly different, and the way it works is different, but they're related. I mean, right. For sure. Yeah. So just a couple of details on the agent. As I said, right, so we're getting data about the wireless driver, which is a really interesting piece in the sense that, a lot of times, whether it's like a Broadcom driver, an Intel driver or something, you'll have these cases where the infrastructure guys, whether it's the Arubas, the Ciscos of the world, will either introduce a new software version or introduce a new AP model or hardware or something like that, where all of a sudden all the Intel drivers, devices with certain Intel drivers won't work anymore, or Intel chipsets, I'm sorry, right? All the users with Broadcom chipsets won't work very well or something like that. And so, having that additional piece of information, then to correlate, just like we correlate across router interfaces and things like that, is sort of a pretty important element there, to get from the client. And then the other side is, there's a bunch of wireless data additional to that, as well as the synthetic test data. So pinging the default gateway, pinging various sources, whether it's in the private data center of the enterprise, whether it's in the public cloud and things like that, and then taking that as sort of almost a little bit of a baseline. Okay, maybe this is a well-behaving client, and this is what that looks like. But then what do all the other clients look like in comparison? And sort of figuring that out.
Is there any ability to manipulate those synthetic tests to kind of customize it towards your enterprise, which applications you want to test against?
Definitely, yeah. So, there are a bunch of configuration knobs. So the targets are configurable. The types of protocols you want to test against are configurable, whether you want to use HTTP or whether you want to use ping or whatever it is. And so, yeah, that's part of it. And it's auto upgraded. So it's managed from our system. Right? Our system via, if it's a store, it'd be managed from there. But, that was an important element of it as well, to have this thing auto-upgrade, as opposed to something that, you have to download a new image or something like that and go, which no user is going to do. And in some enterprises, in fact, they don't even want the users necessarily to muck around with it. So they hide it or whatever, right, when they deploy. As part of an agent. But that's where something like privacy comes in to be very important, where there are explicit configurations where only collect data on these SSIDs, and by default we don't collect any data, so that it makes sure that the enterprise, it's their policy how they want to treat their managed devices or how they want to treat the users and things like that with this, right? So. And so, just one last slide on this, and then I'll jump to the demo after this. And, so as I said, Mac OS X, Windows, and Android are supported. The reason iOS is missing from there, to Greg's point earlier, is because iOS doesn't let you run in the background. And it also doesn't let you grab a bunch of wireless data that we want. And so, we're sort of looking into ways we can kind of, maybe work with Apple or sort of get around that in some way. But for now, at least, because they've kind of locked it down, we haven't gone there yet, or gone there at this point. But we're able to get all that from OS X, Windows, and Android. And so those are the platforms supported. And then, just down the line as we sort of, licensing for the agent. I talked about it's by number of agents. But what do you call it? It's sort of the freemium kind of thing where 10 are free. So if it is truly just an on-demand thing, it's free or whatever as part of the platform, and to see data in the platform around this. But anything more than 10 or whatever, there are bundles that are sort of licensed. Yeah. And then where we're going with this, as I said, correlating and analyzing the data by driver and things like that, adding additional tests, maybe voice tests, and maybe eventually some kind of application level test as well. But right now we're not thinking along those lines. It's more just the network side of it versus a specific app and writing scripts there. Yeah.
When you're digging into the wireless, I imagine that you're probably collecting, which access point the users are connected to. Are you kind of able to do correlation across users to say, listen, this AP is either overloaded or there's obviously some problem with this access point? Yep. Because we're seeing so many problems reported from various users?
Yeah, definitely, and I'll show you that. So, all right, let me switch over here. So what you're looking at here, this is the product, and as I said, so I think first I'll start with sort of a level set of the product and everything that it can do. Then I'll get into sort of what WAN and client agent enable in terms of additional feature set. So what you're looking at here is actually, this is a real live enterprise customer, just everything completely anonymized, so no one knows who it is. So, the first view in the product is kind of this view of all the different sites. That's what's showing on the right. And the view that you're looking at here is something called incidents. And the way we think of incidents is we think of it as an operational use case. So something is an incident only if it's deviated from its baseline. So we go and learn all of the baselines across all of the different, kind of services. And so you can see here, I don't know if you guys can see, maybe I'll zoom in a little bit. This Mexico site has a P2 issue on Radius, right? And why did we say that's a P2 issue? Is we've gone and learned what the baseline looks like. So on the bottom over there, it tells you sort of the root cause, but it also tells you, well, right now what's happening is 22 out of 192 clients are affected, but it's a 5x deviation from your normal baseline. So we're automatically learning at a typical time right now, the Mexico site should only be seeing about 2% of clients having any kind of Radius issue. But right now, they're seeing 11% of those clients having issues. And so this is important to look at right away. So this would actually generate an email alert or a ServiceNow notification, or actually we integrate with Slack as well. Some people use Slack for this. And so that would be notified immediately, but also in the dashboard, you'd sort of see it from an operational perspective.
One notification, or can you have multiple combinations of notifications?
Oh, you can have multiple combinations, yep. Definitely. So email, any combination thereof of email, SMS, ServiceNow, and Slack as of today.
Just trying to avoid the ones where it goes into a pile that no one ever checks, like email.
You got to start with email, man. Everyone's got email.
Yeah, that's the problem. Everyone's got email.
That's true, exactly. Definitely. But yeah, that's why we've done all those integrations for sure. But yeah, and the next steps beyond this, if someone's interested, I can click on it and sort of we can dive in. But this would be sort of the starting point of deciding that, hey, Radius is important from an operational standpoint, and I need to get into that right now. Right? The other high-level view in the product is this tab we call Performance, where now we don't really care about deviations from the baseline. What we're actually looking at is the baseline itself. Right? Organize all my sites by user experience issues that they're having and tell me where I should go focus. So what this list over here on the right is these are different kinds of issues that we're calling out at these sites. So Daly City has a Radius problem, Pittsburgh has a wireless problem, and Manila has an internet problem. Each of these metrics is calculated differently. An internet problem, a generic internet problem to us is clients going to reliable websites like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and whatever, and looking at the TCP latencies, retransmits, window sizes, associated with those transactions. A Wi-Fi problem to us is more of an RF problem for this particular metric. So we're looking at signal-to-noise ratio, layer 2 retransmissions between the access point and the client, and so on. A Radius problem is more so like transaction latency or transaction failures and things like that. And so all of these things are calculated differently. But what you can do over here is you can actually select the metric that you care about. So let's say I wanted to organize all my sites by the internet user experience. So here you can see the Palo Alto site, followed by the Manila, followed by Mexico. Those are sort of the worst sites, versus the ones at the bottom there, the South San Francisco site or Louisville are much, much better in terms of internet user experience. You can even add applications to this view. So if I click over here and, let's say I wanted to see, I don't know, Gmail performance. So I'll sort of add that to it and then say apply settings. And now I can go through this list and select Gmail and say, okay, what's the relative performance across all my sites for Gmail, assuming Gmail is critical or whatever for this. But this would apply to Skype for Business or Citrix in the case of a hospital, or the EMR system and things like that as well. So this is just your high-level view, right? So the next step of this is, okay, well, let's dive in and actually look at what's going on with a particular site. So let me just pick Mexico, I guess, right? Or yeah, maybe I want Mexico. Let's see. Sorry. Yeah, I think I wanted to pick this one. It was just one that I looked up, and I looked up a user before this, so I figured I'll just use this guy. So the Schaumburg site over here. Now, you sort of zoom in to the site itself, and one thing that you'll see here is you'll see the same kind of comparison between the different areas within the site. So different buildings, different floors, and things like that. Something we're about to add to this actually is our floor maps. So you can do a visualization of this on floors as well.
That's nice.
Exactly, right? So you can see what part of the floor is actually having the problems.
So with your integration into wireless controllers where the floor plans are already imported, are you just pulling from there directly?
We're pulling from there directly. We're also allowing people to directly upload if they want as well, right? So we don't sort of force them to go one way or the other. But one thing that I wanted to call out here is, I talked about recommendations earlier, and a lot of customers actually use us this way, where they don't actually look at this list of, stuff that they've defined in terms of floors in different areas. They actually look at this list, which is a list of recommendations, and I'll open this guy up or whatever as an example. So what we're doing here is we've looked at all the data already. So we've looked at all this data over the last 2 weeks. And what we're trying to recommend is we're saying that, okay, based on our analysis of the data, we're trying to make a recommendation to you. So this recommendation is something like alleviate interference from rogue APs on 2.4 gigahertz near this particular access point. And by doing that, we predict that you'll benefit by 475 client hours. Right, so a client hour is a metric that we've kind of introduced around one client having poor user experience in 1 hour is a client hour. And we just count those up across all the clients and all the hours in the last 2 weeks. And so this is our way of saying, if you take this action, we think you'll benefit 475 client hours. If you take this other action over here, this poor coverage on 5 gigahertz near this other access point, we think you'll benefit 396 client hours, and so on. And so this is, some customers, as I said earlier, don't want to look through the data, right? They want us to just tell them what to go and do and how to fix the problems. And this is really where we want to get to in terms of actions. The interesting thing is we don't. So over here, as an example, we'll show the correlation. So the solution to poor coverage on 5 gigahertz sometimes is to actually reduce the transmit powers of the access points. Because what's happening is that transmit power is too high, so clients from really, really far away are connecting to this, and they're finding that the coverage is poor, right? And so the solution is actually to reduce. But in some cases, that can make problems worse, right, depending on the context, right? If they don't actually have enough access points, then you're just going to have a complete black hole in that area, right? And so we don't, we're trying to have a fine balance between telling folks the data and the correlations versus telling them exactly what to go and do and going and doing it. Because at the end of the day, what we find is that there is customer context at the end. And the IT folks at customers, they know best. But we might start offering more suggestions, or maybe having it as something you can enable. Be even more specific. Oh, go and change this configuration in this controller in this way with this CLI command or whatever it is. But we want to make sure we have that balance between the customers sort of knowing their context and their environment the best, versus what we can provide in terms of correlating all this data together. And giving suggestions. So okay, yeah. So this is additionally again, right? So this is one way to interact. The other way to sort of dive into a problem, and I'll do it from here maybe, right? So let's pick this one particular access point group, or this one floor. And basically, you might have a question, okay, we're in the Schaumburg site, we're looking at this particular, area within that site. What's going on here, and how do I get to even more detail? And so the click here, in terms of what I can do about it and sort of exploring in further detail, basically takes you to a page where we kind of give you all the power in the world. It's a little tricky to sort of get right off the bat, but basically what we're looking at is, this is the metric that we're looking at, client Wi-Fi performance. So we're looking at that particular metric. I'll just open this up. If we wanted to, we could be looking at, internet performance, connectivity on Radius, connectivity on DNS, Dropbox performance, all sorts of different kind of applications. But the metric that I came from the dashboard was wireless, and it's filtered to this particular group over here. And so what this page is telling you is additional root causes that we see over here. So if I open this up, this will show you, okay, those are all the different kinds of root causes that we've correlated with in this particular area, what's happening, right? And how many hours were affected by it, right? We've also sort of summarized over here, down here, which clients, which specific users had these problems for which their client hours were counted. Because maybe I want to look into this, right? And that's where my next step is going to go, right? In terms of diving in. There's sort of which APs are affected the most. I'll just show you, that example as well. And I think the question was asked earlier as to, okay, well, where do I go with this? So the other part of analytics, network analytics, as a broad term, is actionability, right? It's actually getting to a point where I can take a next step, right? So in the recommendation side, it was, that's our version of actionability. Here's an action you can take, and this is what we think you'll benefit from. Over here, this is more of like a slightly more power user kind of view, but when we filtered down to this particular area, what access points should I actually be looking at in terms of performance or performance problems? And you can see here the top AP has 22.5% of the time. So there's 440 hours of usage on that access point. And 22% of the time, people have had problems on it, right? Versus this bottom AP, which is also in the same group or in that same building area, has 613 hours of usage, but only 0.2% of the time there are actually problems. So one AP is really, really good, and one AP is pretty bad, right? And so from an action standpoint, I'm going to try and focus on the first one to sort of improve performance and make things better, as opposed to the one at the bottom. And the thing I'll sort of not get into over here is sort of filtering this to the nth degree, which you can also do. So you can say something very, very granular, like, okay, I want to look at this particular root cause, noise from different noise sources in this particular building, on this particular band, affecting this particular operating system, and that's what I want to focus on and see what things are affected. And so all of that power and capability is on this page, but I'll sort of skip that unless there are specific questions.
So I'm just curious. I've got a question. It seems like all the data that you have and the analytics around the wireless. One of the challenges that enterprises always have, at least that I've dealt with, is they don't ever want to get a site survey. They don't ever want to get enough APs, especially in 5 gig that they need. And it's always a difficult justification because people really struggle to articulate, why do I need to buy 500 APs versus 250 APs? And so all the data that you have on there shows a really clear picture of this is exactly what's going to happen if you don't go do this. And it's not always been that clear to see why. So I'm just curious, for enterprises that have sites that tend to duplicate each other, and you build one site out, have you guys ever used this as almost a complement to a site survey tool when you go build the next one? Because you say, look, if you don't do it right, it's going to look like this.
No, definitely, right? And that's typically what we've seen in terms of everything has been anecdotal to this point, right? The way you know that a site has poor user experience is that people call and complain from that site. And if not that many people call from a site, you think that it's good user experience. If a lot of people call, then it's bad user experience. But in reality, what happens is people just get used to it, and they don't call, and then they just tell their, like other people or whatever, that just stuff sucks, right, one way or the other, right? And there's no, nothing quantifiable to sort of justify that one way or the other, and to give kind of that insight.